And I'm going to be talking about how I think visually. I'm going to be talking about how the brain and visual thinking works in design. One of the things I found is if you want to understand animals and understand autism, you've got to get away from language. The human brain has a whole big section which is not, and I'm having some problems with the bright lights, and the problems in autism is sensory sensitivity, so I hope I'm not going to ruin your video too much if I walk away from the bright lights, because I can talk to you a whole lot better if I don't have bright lights shining in my face. Would you turn them down, please? You're going to just have to do the video without so many bright lights. I'm sorry about that, because one of the problems in autism is sensory sensitivities. Also, in working with animals, a lot of animals are very, very sensitive to various things. Now, in the brain, you got language, but then down in the visual cortex, you've got visual thinking. And the thing about being a person with autism is I am into details, sensory detail. When I first started my work with livestock, I worked with the feed yards out in Arizona, and I'd get down in the chutes and I would see what the cattle were seeing. You know, figure out why are the cattle afraid of going through the chutes. They're afraid of things like shadows, bright spots, things like that. Now, if you show a person with autism or the milder version, Asperger's, and I can tell you right now, there's a lot of people in your industry that have the mild Asperger's, and you say pick out the little letters, they'll pick out the little letters a whole lot faster than picking out the big letters. And brain scan research on people with autism has shown that people with autism tend to focus on details. Also, people with autism in the milder version, Asperger's. And I want to emphasize, autism is a very broad disorder, going all the way from somebody that's completely nonverbal, and I'm going to walk over here in the dark, I'm sorry about that, somebody that's completely nonverbal to somebody that is a brilliant genius like Einstein. In fact, if you didn't have people that were a little bit on the spectrum, you just wouldn't have any computers here at all, you wouldn't have any electricity here at all. Also, another thing that's been learned in autism is they use the back part of the brain, back here in the visual cortex. They'll process language-based information back in the visual cortex. There's actually been scientific articles that show that very, very, very clearly. Now, in my work with animals, I had to figure out, you know, why sometimes in one feed yard or ranch, the cattle would walk into the chute, and in another place they absolutely wouldn't walk into the chute. Well, it can be something as simple as a flag waving there. They're afraid of contrast. They're afraid of rapid movement. And I've had places that want to just tear out the whole entire facility when the problem was the flag, you know, waving there in the animal's face. Now, why don't people see that? I mean, to me, it was like, you know, duh. They just don't see it. So when I started out my career, I'd get down in the chutes and I'd see what the cattle were actually seeing. People thought I was nuts. And this brings up another thing. When you're a pioneer in something, and this applies to science too. You're a pioneer in science, you know, new ideas often are not well, you know, they're not received kindly because it goes against some of the theories. And then later on you prove to be right. So I'd find, well, on a sunny day, they'd balk here at these shadows. Okay, they can see these people through the side of the chute. And then I'd find if I like covered up the sides and made them solid, or maybe on a cloudy day it works just fine. But I find I have a difficult time training normal people to find these things. I have to have whole big elaborate verbal checklists, every kind of distraction that there is. And I find they still can't find them. And I guess that's going to give me job security, because a meat plant will call me up and say, well, the USDA has shut us down for excessive use of electric prodders, and the animals just won't walk up the chute. And then I find out that they got a little lady standing right next to the chute, putting down the cattle IDs, and they're asking the cattle to walk by this little lady, and they won't walk by her. So I cover up with a big piece of cardboard, and then it works fine. Why are people not seeing this? The normal mind tends to drop out detail, and that has been shown in brain research. This is hardcore neuroscience. This is one of the areas that I read a lot in. Now, okay, here's another one. Wait a minute, no, back up. This thing seems to have quite a bit of lag. Let's just back up. Okay, just go back to the one just after this. No, next slide, please. Okay, wait a minute. All right, I'm going to just say next slide, please, and I want you to change it. We're going to go low tech. So I find lots of times I just press the button on. Okay, or that slide. Wait a minute. No, you got all this fancy high-tech stuff and it doesn't work. That's another thing. This is another thing that I've found is people thought they could totally fix the schools by putting the schools on the internet. I'll tell you right now, that doesn't replace good teaching. I'll tell you another mistake I made in my career when I first started out. And I've been around now for 35 years. For the first 10 years of my career, I thought I could do everything with engineering. If I could just have the right equipment, everything would be fine. And one of my biggest frustrations was about 25% or more of my clients tore up everything and wrecked it. They just didn't management. The other half is management. I can only fix half of things with technology. I can't fix the other half with technology. Okay, now what is a visual thinker? This is a picture that a young autistic man gave to me to show how he has movies in his head. Now these are old 16mm movie reels. That's what we had our audio-visual on in the 60s. We thought they were really, really cool. But thinking in pictures is literally having pictures in your head. My mind works like Google for images. You put in a search term, and then I get a series of pictures. Now, I used to think everybody thought that way. You know, and I couldn't figure, why can't the other people see the distractions that the cattle see? And I was shocked to find out that a lot of other people don't think the same way. And the way I discovered this, when I wrote my book, Thinking in Pictures, is I interviewed people about how they think. And I said, think about a church steeple. And I just see specific ones. And I can name where the churches are at. I found a lot of people just see sort of a vague, generalized, generic church steeple. I go, wow. Okay, just this year, I have found research studies that show that language-based information gets processed back here deep in visual cortex, people like me, and in other people, it's getting processed up in the language areas that are association cortex. And I'm going, wow, really do think in pictures. Okay, some autistic kids when they're really young have got great drawing skills. I want to emphasize, autism is a continuum from very, very severe to geniuses like Einstein. And skills tend to be uneven. And if a kid's really good at drawing, we need to work on building up that area of strength. One of my big concerns right now, especially with the milder kind of Asperger kids, is the lucky ones get to work for one of your companies. This is Asperger heaven here. And I'll tell you, there's plenty of people here that are Asperger. Wonder how many people are surfing the internet during my talk. Hope not very many. Because when they do that in my classes at home, I run up to those computers, and if it doesn't have class notes on it, I take it away from them. Just that simple. And I'm seeing smart, mildly autistic kids, and Asperger's is just mild autism, especially get out in the Midwest, going down kind of a special education rut. They're not getting into the good tech jobs. You know, they might be working at a convenience store or a gas station if they're lucky, or they might have no job at all and they're miserable because nobody worked on developing their areas of strength. Now, this is one of the facilities I designed for a large meat plant, and half the cattle in this country, when they go to a meat plant, are handled in things I designed. And when I was a young child, I was a nonverbal autistic child. They thought I'd have to go to school for the retarded and go to an institution. And I really wanted to, you know, prove to people I wasn't stupid. And when I design these things, I can actually test run the equipment in my head. See, visual thinking is a continuum from people that can test run equipment in their head to people that can do still pictures. Most designers that I've worked with, you know, most of them have been in the meat industry, the real good designers that can lay out a whole plant, visualize it in their head, they see still pictures. You know, it was interesting talking to other people and finding out how my mind was different. And here's one of my facilities down in Brazil, and you might wonder, why make it curved? Because as the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. That's using a natural behavior of cattle. Another problem I have with people is getting them to use the animal's natural behavior. They want to force the animals. You know, you've got an animal that's afraid of a shadow, he'll look right at that shadow. You know, and then take the shadow out. And I love this job. I love to fantasize that 1,000 years from now, the archaeologists are going to dig this up and they're going to be having learned discussions of its religious significance. Well, it doesn't have any religious significance, I'll tell you that right now. But I'm sure they can invent that, and that the priest stands in the middle, and it faces the summer solstice, you know, all that kind of good stuff. Now, I've been observing some interesting things with drawing. I've worked as a designer for 35 years. Of course, started out with just hand drawing. And one of the things that a person's got to learn is how the lines on a drawing relate to the physical structure. And the way I train myself on that, and the way I'm training some of my students, is I take a drawing for a cattle handling facility like this, and I have them walk through the actual thing. You know, when I first started out, there might be a square on a drawing, and it really helped me to visualize better if I walked over and saw that that square was a concrete column, or a circle on a drawing was a big tank. You know, you've got to learn to relate the kind of more abstract drawing, the actual thing that you are seeing. Here's the basic cattle handling facility, and there's a drawing of it. And I have the students switch back and forth between the drawing and the actual thing, because I've got to get them to see it. And I noticed some very interesting, disturbing things happened when our industry switched over from drawing by hand to drawing computers. Us old geezers that switched over to the computers, we did just fine, draw good drawings. But we had a young person come in and do a drawing, and he's never drawn by hand, and he's never built anything by hand. They started making a whole lot of weird mistakes on drawings. They were not seeing. There's a very interesting Oliver Sacks chapter in a book about a person that had cataracts as a child, and when they were a full-fledged grown-up, they got their sight restored. And they didn't know what to do with sight. And the only things they understood were the things that they could actually touch, you know, like a lamp or, you know, a dog or a couch, you know, things they could actually put their hands on. And to understand seeing a house, it helped them to touch a model house. How does a baby learn to see things? Well, it touches the ball, puts it in its mouth, but then it's also seeing it. They got to learn, you know, what the vision means. And people that have never taken that compass and actually spun it around don't know where the center of the circle is. I have drawings at home from every single major meat company. And when I saw when the switch was going, you know, younger people coming in drawing on CAD, boy, I got some terrible drawings with perceptual mistakes. In my drawing class, one girl didn't even know what a compass was. She brought a Boy Scout compass into class to draw circles with. I have read a lot of articles about Pixar and Disney. I've given talks at Pixar and Disney, and I've talked to people that hire the artists, and they hire artists first. They want to make sure they know how to draw, and then they do the computer stuff. Okay, here are some of the weird mistakes we got. Radius point of the circle in the wrong place. They just simply didn't know where to put the center of a circle because they'd never done the motor thing of spinning around with a compass. I have an assistant, and I taught him drafting. And the first thing I did is I taught him hand drafting. And I got him really good at hand drafting. Then we went to computer school. But when he went to school for computer-aided drafting, they only taught him how to do the commands. They didn't teach him how to use the compass function that comes with the program. So when he got back from computer school, I sat beside him and we went over all the little icons to learn what they do. You know, another stockyard for a major company had 25-foot long gates. Now there's no way a 25-foot long gate's going to work. And when you just look at the drawing fast, it looked okay. But when I took my scale ruler and I laid it on the drawing, I go, eek! Another mistake on another drawing for cattle, you use stair steps. You make them 3.5 inches high and 18 inches or to 2 feet long, little low rise. Well, some engineer wanted to save on concrete forming costs, so he wanted to go with a 6-inch step. Well, I was worried that the cattle would stumble, so I told him to put it back to the 3.5-inch step. I get the drawings back, and it goes like this. Goes up like this, and then just a straight ramp. They hadn't added extra steps. I'm glad I looked at that. They don't bother to actually swing the gates on a drawing to see if they're going to be in the right place. And then they say, well, we'll just send you a bigger part of it. So then they send me the drawings all screwed up, and what do? I get out my old-fashioned drawing tools, mark it up, and scan it and send it back to them, marked up by hand, and then they redo it, and then it works. I've got one in the mail when I get back home that I've got to fix. Okay, how do you form a concept when you have all these pictures in your head, like Google for Images? You form concepts by putting pictures into boxes. And the thing about this kind of thinking, it's bottom-up thinking. Lots and lots of information in my head, and I have to learn a whole lot of specific examples to have a concept. Okay, how did I understand what a dog or a cat was? At first, I sorted dogs and cats by size. But then, when our next-door neighbor's got a little tiny, tiny dog, I go, well, I can't sort them by size anymore. So I remember studying this little dachshund, and I studied this little dachshund, and I finally figured out that every dog, even the ones that are absolutely, totally weird, all have exactly the same kind of nose shape. You see, the thing is, this is sensory-based thinking. You want to understand animals, you want to understand nonverbal people with autism, you got to get away from language. Animals are sensory-based thinkers. They think in pictures, they think in sounds, they think in smells, they think in touch sensations. And it's all specific. There is no general concept. To understand a concept, like if you're training a guide dog about what to do with the blind person at the intersection, you got to show him many, many, many different intersections. Ones with white lines, ones with lights, ones with stop signs. And then he puts all those intersections in the intersection file, and that's how he makes a concept. Now, I used to joke around that I had a gigantic internet connection deep into my visual cortex. This is what's called tensor imaging, and it measures great big myelinated trunk lines, like bus lines in the brain. And here, from here, this is right here at the eyes. Yep, I got a big one, and it's twice as fat as my sex-age matched control. The research really is showing that people on the spectrum think with the visual cortex. Also, some of the people with dyslexia think this way, some of the people with a number of other things. But visual thinking's a continuum. Some people are better at it than others. I have found in interviewing people, I've found a few people that can't visualize at all. If I say the church steeple question, they just hear the bell. Now, why did I pick out church steeples? Because it's something that everybody sees every single day, but they don't pay attention to them. If I ask you house, dog, or car, most people can visualize that because they're so familiar with those things. But I ask you something that's a little bit less familiar, the non-visual thinkers tend to not be seeing it. And here's another slice up here at the forehead, and I've got a great big one there. Okay, this is a really important slide. There are a lot of students out there that would work just fantastic in your business, doing well, doing poorly in school, because they're good at one thing and they're bad at something else. I'm a visual thinker. I think in photorealistic pictures. I absolutely could not do algebra. But I'm finding a whole lot of people that cannot do algebra, but they can do geometry and trig. And there's kind of two different ways that you can think about a math problem. There's a book coming out called Perfect Rigor about an Asperger super smart mathematician. And you might have a formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared. All right, that's sort of more the language-based way of thinking about it, or you can just see the patterns. And we need to be working on building the strength area. Music and math minds, these are pattern thinkers, sort of a more abstract visual thinking. These people are often really good at computer programming, engineering, mathematics sort of things. May have problems with reading and writing composition. And then there's a third type, they're kind of a verbal mind. They're very good at remembering lots and lots and lots of verbal facts. And one of my big concerns is some of these smart, quirky kids that get an Asperger label, and they're sort of headed to nowhere. And the thing that really helped me when I was in high school, and I was teased and tortured in high school, was my science teacher, mentors. One of the things that some of you guys can do, you find out the next door neighbor's got a kid labeled Asperger's, maybe you start teaching them web design or whatever, or programming, whatever you're working on, because mentors help me. I was messing around in school. I didn't care about studying. I didn't see any reason for studying. And then Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, he gave me a goal. And my goal was going to be becoming a scientist. So now I had a reason for studying. And mentors can just help people just so much. And the other thing that the kid's got to learn is he's got to learn to do an assigned task. I am seeing too many of these smart kids are getting so addicted to video games that you can't get them to do anything that's an employable skill. And I'm not a big fan of little game controller and totally hypnotized because if that had happened to me as a child, I would have never have become a scientist. And I'm not able to do programming. The kind of stuff that I do, the kind of skills I need for video game design, I don't have those skills. This is where ability does make a difference. Yeah, you let them do them for an hour a day, but they've got to learn to do things with an assigned task. I'm very high on getting a lot of these kids into these robotics clubs, the young kids, 7th and 8th grade kids. But that robot's got to do an assigned task. They've got to learn how to do something that somebody else wants. Because if they don't learn that, they're not going to be very employable. Now, I want to give you a glimpse into the pattern thinker mind. This is not my mind. This is extreme origami. That praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cuts, no Scotch tape. And what's in the background there is the folding pattern for making the praying mantis. I'm going, wow. There's different kinds of minds. And then there's some people that are word minds. They just don't have any visual thinking at all. I ask them a church steeple question. I ask them, walk through your own house in your mind, and they can't even do that. Most people can do that. But visual thinking is a continuum. Now, this is really super interesting. Van Gogh doesn't care anything about mathematical models of turbulence. But it turns out that he painted those into his paintings Starry Night. And this picture's been mathematically analyzed. So the pattern thinking, the visual thinking, it's covered up by language in a lot of people. These are famous people that would be labeled either Asperger or autistic today. And the thing that worries me is where is the young Einstein today? What's happened to him? Is he, cleaning toilets somewhere instead of, doing physics? And the thing that's a key difference is finding a teacher, mentor the person. So how do you learn a concept? I already talked a little bit about the guide dog. I have to learn a concept by taking a whole lot of specific examples and putting them in a file folder. It's important with young autistic kids to teach them how to do categories because the autistic brain has problems with opening up new file folders. Brain research has shown that the brain makes file folders, sensory-based file folders. It can put information in this file folder or that file folder. Now, if I say to the autistic kid, pick out the red objects, they can do that. But where they have a problem is making up new categories, like maybe round objects, or contains plastic, or contains paper. They've got to learn how to make up new file folders. Okay, some people think autistic is just memorization. Yeah, in the beginning it is. Since it's bottom-up thinking, I had to be exposed to lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different experiences in order to fill up my mind with experiences that I could then relate to some new thing in the future. Now, let's get a little bit more into the mind of an animal. Animals can get fear memories, and they're visual or they're sound. This horse was scared to death of black cowboy hats because somebody abused him that was wearing a black cowboy hat. Now, if I put the hat down on the ground, the hat was less scary. Because you see, it's a picture matching. See, research actually shows that even ants can match pictures. Like the way an ant finds its way back home is as he's walking out to forage, he takes pictures, landmarks, and then when he comes back home, he turns his head around, looks, and is looking for picture matches. And a white cowboy hat had no effect, but a black hat was scary. Now, less scary put on the ground. Or you can have a sound memory. There was an elephant that was scared to death of diesel-powered equipment. If the machine had a diesel engine, he was afraid of it. If it had a gas engine, then it was just fine. Diesel engines were associated with bad things. See, the thing is, sensory-based thinking is very specific. Man on a horse, man on the ground. The horse perceives that as two totally different things. You can have a situation where the horse is maybe abused by a rider. He'll buck you off when you try to ride him. but you can do veterinary work and shoeing work when you're working with them on the ground. You see, it's like two different files. A dog will have two different files. On the leash, I protect the owner. Off the leash, I can go play. Well, here are some examples of some very specific animal fear memories. Dogs will often get afraid of the place where they get hit by the car, because that's what they were looking at right when the bad thing happened. And the animal doesn't have quite enough association cortex to realize that it's the car. Or a horse might be fine with one type of bit, but be scared with a bit associated with being hurt. Okay, let's say I have a one-piece bit and I have a jointed bit, and I hold them in each hand like this. They feel different. It's these different feeling pictures. See, I just want to try to get you to think about thinking in sensory rather than thinking in words. And yes, animals really do have cognition. Do they think? Research is showing now, yes, they do. They're able to solve problems under new conditions. These are things that thinking is not. It's not simple associative learning, things like operant or classical conditioning, where, okay, you learn that if you press the switch, you get some food, or you jump over this thing, you can avoid getting a shock, or you smell a piece of meat and you salivate. I mean, that's just simple associative learning. It's also not hardwired instinctual behavior. Animals have some hardwired behaviors. We have them too. I think fighting is one of them. People seem to have a real problem with controlling that. Now, this crow figured out how to bend a little paperclip wire to reach down into this tube and snag a bucket full of treats. That's figuring out how to make a tool. You know, that requires thinking. And what is the beginning of thinking? You know, because you might say, well, maybe the animal just works with reflexes. It's just all reflexes. You know, like if this was a hot stove and I put my hand on there, I just instantly pull my hand away. The brain isn't even needed for that. That's a spinal reflex that happens in the spine. But you all seen an animal orient, and it looks at something. And the deer turns and it looks at something. And he goes, okay, do I keep looking? Do I run away? Or do I graze? You see, a decision gets made. It isn't just reflexive. That's the beginning of thinking. That's the beginning of behavior that is not just automatic. Now, when I took psychology back in the 60s, everything was Freud. And there was all this stuff about the Freudian subconscious, all this sexual stuff and things like that that's not appropriate to talk about today. And I could see all that stuff, all those kind of dirty little web pages and things like that that would pop up. And it was interesting to learn that a lot of other people don't see that. You see, the thing is, I think with the part of the brain that's subconscious in most people. You know, but I mean, it took me, 30 years to figure that out. You know, the neuroscience had to catch up so I could learn that I'm basically thinking with the subconscious. Yeah, there's dirty little web pages. My frontal cortex tells me, you censor that. Yeah, net nanny up here, you censor that. You don't, filthy little web pages. You know, click them off. You know, I'm not going to talk about those. You know, I was seeing all that stuff. But there's some people that don't see that stuff. And when you look at research on something like post-traumatic stress syndrome, there was a very interesting paper that I found that showed that the people that were visual thinkers had the worst problems with traumatic stress syndrome, after they'd had a really scary or bad experience. The people that were totally verbal and could suppress all the graphics files and not see them, they had the least amount of problems with post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now, one thing that's kind of weird with me is there's some circuits not hooked up. There's some social circuits not hooked up. When I have a scary experience, it was very, very scary at the time. I was almost killed by a train 15 years ago when a friend of mine and I did the world's dumbest, stupidest thing you possibly could do. We wanted to go fishing at the favorite fishing spot, and we walked out across a railroad trestle that went around a bend where you couldn't see whether there was a train coming. And we get halfway across the trestle, and there was a train. And I'm not going to tell you the swear words that came out of my mouth, her mouth. They were really bad. And we ran, and you know how the dirt comes up to the trestle like this, and I jumped off the trestle, and I jumped down, I'm on the dirt, and there's the wheel of a train right there. I can tell you, at the time that that happened, I was absolutely terrified. But I can play that back, and I'm not terrified. But most people, when they play stuff like that back, they get completely terrified. And And I went on this real curvy road called Independence Pass in Colorado. I'll never go there again. The road's like 2 feet wide, and you make one move when you're down a 1,000-foot cliff. Ugh, horrible. Never go there again. The road's like 2 feet wide, and you make one move when you're down a 1,000-foot cliff. Ugh, horrible. But I can think about that and not get scared. How do you think about abstract things? You know, beauty, freedom, justice, stuff like that when you think in pictures. I still have to think in pictures. This is my picture for the power and the glory in the Lord's Prayer. A rainbow, that's the glory. You see, if I have no picture, I have no thought. And when I was really young in high school, I had all these doors that I went through. And HBO's made a movie about me starring Claire Danes. It's going to show in February. I had a chance to preview it, and they show my visual thinking and door symbols absolutely the coolest way. I can't tell you everything about it because I can't do spoilers. But there's, they got a scene in there about shoes. This one I can tell you about. Think about shoes, and all these pictures of 50s and 60s shoes just flash up. And that's exactly the way that I think. And then some of the stuff they do with the doors, I'm not going to tell you because that would wreck it. But the thing is, I basically don't have purely abstract thought. If somebody says to me, think about justice, well, I'm seeing Perry Mason in the courtroom, I'm seeing the scales of justice, and then I can get off the subject. Like John Ashcroft thought that the Lady Justice was indecent because her you-know-whats were showing, so they had to cover her up. So that's how I got off the subject. You see, I can get, it's just like a search engine. I can get off the subject from justice. But I have to think of specific examples of justice and specific examples of things that would be unjust. You know, I sort of don't have this sort of vague concept of justice. You know, that's just too abstract. Now, there's some research with Alzheimer's that shows that visual thinking, music thinking, and math thinking is covered up by language in normal people. This picture was painted by an Alzheimer's patient with no previous interest in art that got frontal temporal lobe dementia. This is the work of Bruce Miller here in California. This was published in the journal Neurology, did not come out of the National Enquirer. And as the frontal cortex was wrecked, as the language parts of the brain were destroyed, art talent like this came out of some of these patients. Thought that was real interesting. Here's another painting, again, published in the Journal of Neurology. And some of the occupations for these people were stockbroker and tape deck installer. I mean, they had no previous interest in music or art. Now, this is the hidden figure test. You know, people that are autistic are often really good at this. Okay, you see this figure right here. How many of you see it over here in this figure? Okay, a little bit better than average. Okay, I'll show you. See, it's right there. It's right there staring you in the face. You know, it's a, you know, do this at other meetings, the number of people that see it's a whole lot less. Now, some brain research has shown that in the autistic brain, it's sort of like a little bright cabin in the wilderness. You know, okay, you got that big internet line into the visual cortex, sort of like this little bright cabin, but a lot of frontal cortex and a lot of social circuits are not hooked up. Because after all, we're geeks, who's interested in all that stupid social stuff, because doing all the techie stuff is much more fun than all the social stuff. Now, this is what I call a visual symbol picture. In order for me to think abstractly, I know this is not a brain scan, but this is my visual symbol picture for the brain scan of the autistic person. Yep, we got a big trunk line into the visual cortex, and a bunch of other stuff's kind of shut off. And this is the visual symbol picture for the brain scan of the normal person. We got so much other stuff turned on here, it kind of covers up the visual thinking. And that's basically what happens in the brain. Now, what's that all about? Well, that's getting to be even more of an abstract stretch, because see, I cannot think without a picture. Skeletal building. What does that have to do with the brain? Well, in your brain is got white matter and gray matter. Okay, what's gray matter do? Gray matter is the stuff that you think with. It's like your integrated circuits. White matter, which is half of your brain, is the circuits that interconnect everything else in the brain. It's the interdepartmental communications in your brain. And this is where you have abnormalities in autism. You might have a great big circuit going into the visual cortex, but a whole bunch of other circuits aren't hooked up. And I like to visualize the brain as this great big corporate office tower. Up at the top you have the president, the frontal cortex, the CEO. In fact, the frontal cortex is called the executive function in the brain. Okay, then down maybe a few floors down we got the division level vice presidents. That's language. Then below that we got the good geek stuff. Music and math and art and all that kind of stuff is really worthwhile stuff to do. And those circuits may get extra interdepartmental communications. But stupid old suits up in the office, I mean, who cares about them? You're going to give them one dial-up because they're stupid suits, and we don't need to communicate with them anyway. And there's a ton of papers now in scientific research that are showing that basically that's what happens. If some of you are interested in that scientific research, you can go to the PubMed database, P-U-B-M-E-D. Type it into Google. It takes you right into the National Library of Medicine. It takes you off the internet and strictly into the world of scientific journal articles. Type in like autism and brain. There's a lot of interesting things being done. You see, when you hear a word, you see a word, speak a word, or you think about a word, different parts of the brain get turned on. But then you've got to have all this white matter interdepartmental communications. And this is where things get left out. And those techie departments may get extra wiring, and the social stuff may get shortchanged on wiring. And I want to emphasize how variable these things are, and diagnoses like dyslexia, autism, ADHD. These are not precise diagnoses. They are behavioral profiles where a group of psychiatrists sat in a meeting room like this, sat at tables with little claws on them like this, and they decided what these profiles were going to be, trying to base it on scientific research. It is not a precise diagnosis like tuberculosis, where they can do a lab test, tell you exactly what genetic line of tuberculosis you have. It's not precise. Okay, I want to mention some other things with perception. People with dyslexia, people with autism, people with head injuries, people with a number of other labels sometimes get distorted perception. And these are problems inside the brain. And I want to emphasize these are not hallucinations. Let me explain the difference between schizophrenic hallucination and perceptual distortion. Typical schizophrenic delusion is that you hear a voice, that the satellite dish is giving you secret, secret codes to do something, or the FBI has planted a computer chip up your butt. That actually was a real case. That's what the guy believed. There was another one where the dog was telling him to do all kinds of stuff. There's usually some kind of outside agent. It might be God, it might be computers, it might be, a laptop right here is telling me to do stuff. There's some outside entity making you do stuff. That is more of the schizophrenic sort of hallucination, delusions. What I'm talking about now is perceptual distortion. There's nothing wrong with the thinking part of the brain, but the sensory systems aren't working right. In other words, eyes and ears are normal. You go into the ear doctor, everything's fine. You go to the eye doctor, he looks at your eyeballs, that's all fine. But then here in the circuitry inside the brain, stuff is wrong. And one of the common perceptual distortion problems is image breakup. Okay, this is from Oliver Sacks's book, Migraine. You get a migraine headache, image breaks up. But there are some people that have these problems all the time. They absolutely cannot tolerate fluorescent lights. They can actually see the 60-cycle flicker of AC current turning on and off. It drives them absolutely crazy. I'll tell you, people that have this problem, they can't draw. And I am finding in my design class, because I have a class where I have 30 or 40 students every semester designing cattle handling facilities, and they do it the old-fashioned way. And I make them buy compasses and get scale rulers and things like that. I'm finding one of these in every single class. And they draw all kinds of, well, mixed up kinds of ways. They just don't, they're not seeing right. And they tend to see just fragments of things. Like I had a student that was dyslexic, and we stopped at a stop sign, and there's this funny old art store we have called Artorama. And I said, oh, that's a funny name for a store, Artorama. And she says to me, you saw the whole sign? There was a sign maybe 20 feet long. She just saw the A, the first letter of the sign. Different kind of perception. And when the person goes to read, sometimes the print will jiggle on the page. It's another common problem. Really mess you up in college, a whole lot. And I want to talk, before I get into sound sensitivity, some simple things that you can do to help with those visual processing problems. Get away from fluorescent lights. Using an LCD screen like this, these don't flicker. A lot of other types of screens flicker. But one of the things that can really help you is colored glasses. It sounds crazy. Nobody knows how they work. But in your brain, you got circuits for color, shape, and motion. You have separate circuits back here. The whole back third of your brain's visual cortex. And these shape, color, and motion circuits assemble graphics files in your brain. Nobody knows how it works. But there's something wrong with it. They're not working together, and that's what causes these problems. And sometimes you find just the right pale colored glasses, the shaking of the print will stop, and it will help correct the visual perception. It's unknown how they work, but I have sent students out to the store to shop for glasses. I had one girl come back. She came back with some pink glasses, and she said, Dr. Grandin, I just got an A on my economics quiz because the PowerPoint slides are no longer jiggling on the screen. I can now see the graphs and the economic lecture. Okay, some people on the spectrum and a lot of animals have extremely sensitive hearing. And as I'm getting older now, I'm having more and more problems with lights that are just too bright in my eyes because it's overwhelming. Okay, in the video, it's a really cool video that was shown there. At the end, everything's kind of blowing up all the time. For a very severe nonverbal person with autism, you take them in the supermarket, that's how they feel. It's like being inside the speaker at the rock concert. Sounds that don't bother you are just overwhelmingly bad. They hurt. A loud sound like a smoke alarm going off, that was like a dentist drilling a hole in my nerves. And you go in, you test the auditory threshold. That's the ability to hear faint sounds. That's normal. Ear's normal. But there's often problems in hearing hard consonant sounds. Like if I said cat or I said bat, I have to kind of figure that out by context. Obviously, they're not going to be talking, if somebody's talking about their pet cat, it's not going to be a bat, either a baseball bat or a bat that flies around. It's going to be a cat. I figured that out by context. The circuits in the brain that process rapidly moving sounds are not working right. Another problem that you'll have, brains that sometimes have a lot of problems, is attention shifting slowness. This is some work that was done where an electronic tracking device was put on people's eyes, and they had people watch Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which I happen to say is a boring social movie that, I mean, this is a real sleeper. Can't even keep the headphones on an airplane watching this movie. Really boring, fall asleep in the middle of it. But when I was on an airplane, and they had The Day the Earth Stood Still on, and my little TV was broken, I made sure I found another seat where it worked. Okay, look at how many times the normal person is looking back and forth between the eyes. I didn't even know that people had secret eye signals until I read about them in a book when I was 50 years old. But the other thing you got here is look at how many times the yellow line looks back and forth compared to the red line, it's the person with autism. Brains that have difficulties switch attention extremely slowly. They have problems disengaging. Okay, let's say I'm over here looking at this thing because I find this, all the wires on the back of this thing really, really interesting to look at. And I don't want to get too close to it because I might get feedback, and I don't like that. And I'm so intent on looking at this blue and white wire on here that, you know, maybe the fire's burning out in the hall and I don't, you know, disengage from this and switch over. Tension shifting slowness. And then the autistic's looking at the math. Why are they looking at the math? Trying to lip read. You've got to remember they don't hear very well. And why has it taken scientists such a long time to study these sensory processing problems? They can be extremely debilitating. You know, there are some people that cannot tolerate a normal office. They cannot tolerate a supermarket. And why are the scientists are studying all the social stuff? We got hundreds of papers on the social circuits. And we got just a handful of papers now on the sensory stuff. Why is it taking so long to study this? I think it's difficult for normal people to imagine an alternate reality where maybe visual systems breaking up, loud sounds are hurting your ears, or you don't hear hard consonant sounds. They don't imagine that. I can do an autism talk. I'm going to be doing one tomorrow in Phoenix, and talk about about problems with hearing hard consonant sounds, that I don't hear them very well. And they walk up to the book table and they'll give me some name that's a strange name and expect me to hear the hard consonant sounds, after I just told them 15 minutes prior that I can't hear them. Okay, another brain scan showed that I was more interested in looking at pictures of things than looking at pictures of faces. A whole bunch of photographs and videos were shown to me while I laid in this scanner. Things like apples, buildings, flying over the Grand Canyon made me dizzy, so I shut my eyes during that. I wasn't supposed to. But it still showed up that I was more interested in things. And one of the reasons why I was interested in the things is I was trying to figure out where they got all the weird old videos from that they were showing. But the thing is, we need to have people in the world interested in things, or you wouldn't have any electricity, you certainly wouldn't have any computers, you wouldn't have any cars, we'd still be back in a cave. Because who do you think made the first stone spear? The person that made the first stone spear probably was some Asperger, totally absorbed in how to chip that rock. And where were all the social people? They were around yakking all around the campfire. So we need to have it. So what this brings up, and in looking at the brain research, there's kind of a wide range of brains. You can build a brain to be more cognitive, put more circuits back here, or you can build a brain to be more social. And what's being learned now about dogs is super interesting. It turns out that over the eons, people have bred super hyper social animals. Like if you point, a dog knows what that means. Chimps can't do that. Chimps are too busy fighting. But we've bred the dog to be very super hyper socially aware. They're a hyper social being. There's now research actually showing that about dogs, very new research. Scientists have learned a lot about the brain. Sensory problems are real. They need to be doing a lot more studying of that. There's immature development. The emotional circuits are kind of immature. But where the big differences are abnormal circuits between the different brain departments. And frontal cortex up here is used a whole lot less. That's my website. Got lots of livestock stuff on there. And hopefully we got some time for some questions, because I always like to do some questions. And if nobody has a question, I'm going to pick somebody. And I'm really, really happy that there's not a zillion computers open, because that shows that maybe actually, hopefully I gave you some things to think about.
Thank you. We could have the house lights up so we can see the audience better. Anybody with any questions for Dr. Grandin?
I'm going to pick somebody.
We have a couple of hands. We have a
right
bunch
here.
of hands. So come on, get Mr. Microphone. Oh, there it is, over there. Sorry, Temple. There's a gentleman over there.
Hi, my name is John.
A little hard to see.
I have a quick question
Bring the
for
lights
you
up higher.
about the, in viewing any of these newer models for web-based videos that use a lot of large graphics and to try and convey a deeper theme, is that something, how does that transfer to your processing?
Well, let's just look at, I have no visual processing problems. See, this is where autism is very, I'm a little bit sensitive to bright light, but I have, I see things normal. I'll tell you some things I hate on web pages. Things like a purple textured background with yellow print, and I hate that in magazines too. It just makes it too hard to read. I kind of think, to me, there's kind of two things I want to do with web pages. Some stuff, like if I go to PubMed, I just want to read scientific information. Then there's other stuff where I'm going to want to look at graphics. Okay, like this video you just showed, that's sort of one way of communicating. But there's also scientific research on synesthesia. And what the scientific research is showing is there's cross-wiring in different parts of the brain where there's not supposed to be it. And that's why you can taste a shape or hear a color. The brain is wired differently. I think it's sort of like what you want to do with it. What are you trying to convey with it? But one thing I get frustrated with is using a lot of things is just too complicated. Like I bought a CD player and all I wanted to do was play the CDs. And sometimes stuff's made too complicated. One of the reasons why I think Google was so successful is that little search box came up, nothing for anybody to learn. They could type Google, www.google.com and get that search box up. There's nothing to learn. You just type in the search box. And I think we need to be getting, there's a lot of stuff. I know you guys think it's really cool, you know, sometimes to have a whole lot of stuff. The average user doesn't. Okay, I mean, the iPhone's a really pretty phone, but you know what turns off business users? You can't change the battery yourself. And the battery life's lousy. You know, I think you have to look at who's using the thing. You know, there's some people use it, they want it to be cool. There's other people that are going to use it that just want it for business. And I work with business people, and they want phones with good reception, that work, and the batteries last for a long time. That's what business people want.
Do we have a question?
And not break if you drop them.
We have a question
Okay.
right here.
Hi. You talked a little bit about visual sensitivity and the disconnect between hearing and the brain, and the ear is fine, the eye is fine. Is there any scientific studies into the smelling or the nose?
Well, that's a good question. Basically, hearing, of all the senses, vision is the most complicated sense. And you've got a lot of complicated circuits back here, the assemble files. You'll get the Nobel Prize if you can explain how they work. That's called the binding problem in vision research. Hearing has got a lot of complicated circuits. Smell and touch are the simple senses. One of the interesting things, let's say you have a nonverbal person with autism, they often are touching everything, putting things in their mouths, because those senses still work. Those senses are simpler. They're simpler in the wiring, and they are still giving accurate information, where vision and hearing may be a jumble. You talk to, there's a person named Tito Mukhopadhyay, and if you want to see how he perceives the world, he has a book called How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? How can I talk if my lips don't move? And he talked about looking at a blue door, and he had to look at it for a long time. First of all, he perceived the color blue, then he perceived the shape of the door and could tell that it was a door. You see, it's fractured visual perception. Also, a lot of it is very slow visual perception. He describes in there putting on a t-shirt, and his teacher put it on very gradually. He had to feel how to slip it over his head and then put his arms through it. And if it was put on fast, it went so fast he couldn't figure out, you know, what to do. There's a lot of problems with remembering sequence. I cannot remember long strings of verbal information, but these things are variable. Thinking in pictures, you know, which you can get that book at any bookstore. You can, I've written up a lot of first-person reports in there of how perception is different. It's variable. Some people's hearing will be like a bad cell phone connection, where the hearing will fade in and out. You know, when they're tired. And when the person gets tired, these problems get worse. But I've been talking about sensory problems now for 25 years. And it's only been recently, in the last 5 years, that the research has started on this. Oh, they're studying it. Oh, we got, you know, 1,000 papers on brain scans on the social circuits. But we're not looking at the sensory stuff. I think it was hard for people to relate to a different sensory reality. And then they also mix it up with schizophrenia. And this is not schizophrenia. I want to make it very, very clear. This is sensory system malfunctioning inside the brain.
Dr. Grandin, I think we have a question way over here on the left side.
Okay.
You were fortunate in that you had a mentor, and I assume someone who drew you out and understood perhaps your specializations in your brain. How might one draw out the specializations of somebody on the autism spectrum, Asperger's spectrum? I have a niece in my family.
Okay, how do you find a mentor? You can find mentors in a lot of different places. So, and mine happened to be my science teacher. Another person that was Asperger's, a very successful film photographer, you know, for movies. He's a freelance film photographer. Next door neighbor taught him. And the other thing is, that mentor could teach you something old-fashioned. One mom taught her kid DOS programming. She knew DOS programming, ancient old DOS. But that got the kid turned on. Somebody's got to mentor them. Kids don't go into Barnes & Noble and buy high-level computer books. It just doesn't happen. Okay, somebody had to teach the kid DOS. There is a certain discipline to that. Then he asked for DOS secrets for Christmas. And then after that, he went and bought, you know, JavaScript and all the, you know, things that were more modern things. But there has to be some disciplined instruction. And it doesn't matter if it's old, because what you're doing is you're getting the kid turned on. I've talked to a lot of parents out here in Silicon Valley. A lot of those kids are just apprenticed into computers by the parents, by neighbors. Mentors can be, anyway. I talked to a parent out in Kansas, and she goes, oh, there's nothing for my kid to do here. I go, wait a minute, there's feedlots. That's where I got started. Feed mills, combines, oil wells, gas pumping stations, corn processing plants, meat plants. There's all kinds of interesting things. All kinds of mechanical stuff, fixing equipment, things like that. There's all kinds of interesting things. And how do you mentor a kid? One time I stopped at a little podunk airport. I had to, on a private plane, and I had to go to the restroom, and I walked into this hangar in this little tiny airport in the middle of nowhere, and there was the coolest antique plane in there that they were restoring. That's the kind of thing you get an Asperger kid in there working on that antique plane. These mentors can be anywhere, and you've got to work in the kid's area of strength. It's like that hidden figure test. It's right there staring you in the face, but you don't see it. How did I get into my first meatpacking plant? I met the wife of their insurance agent. Also, people thought I was really weird and nerdy, and I had to sell my skill. And when I whipped out my drawings and I showed them my drawings, I go, oh, wow, you drew that? But kids have to be developed. What I'm finding happening now, a lot of these kids are getting addicted to video games. They're just all day doing this, and they're not learning employable skills. And maybe 10% of those kids could either be an illustrator or a programmer for video games. The others are not capable of doing that. It's not a realistic goal. Web design might be a realistic goal, but not the highest level programming. And they get addicted to that, and they don't want to do anything else. You see, I could have been one of those addicts. Now, I don't believe in forbidden fruit, but I tell parents 1 hour a day. A little game controller like that, that's 1 hour a day. Other things on computers, they want to program for 6 hours a day where they're learning about programming, career relevant stuff. And there's a happy people, especially the milder Asperger kids, they're the ones that have good careers. And you might wonder, is autism increased? Is Asperger's increased? Asperger's is not increased. It's always been here. Where are all the old Aspergers that are 40, 50, and 60, my age? They are employed. And this gets back to our more rigid 50s upbringing. Manners were pounded in, saying please and thank you was pounded in. Social skills were taught in a more structured way. The mentoring, I can't emphasize that enough, because you can take a kid that's floundering around, and you could be a mentor. I don't know what you do if it's web design. Teach a kid web design. Now the thing is, there's a zillion people out there doing web design, so you've got to get really good at some niche. You see, like designing cattle handling equipment was a very specific niche. Because you've got to pick out a niche and get really good at it and get recognized for your work. Every one of you in here could be a mentor to one of these kids. I'm going to bet you that everyone in here knows somebody as an autistic kid. Now, obviously, you're not going to teach web design to, there's the very, very severe ones that are nonverbal, obviously. But there's all these kind of quirky Asperger kids. And I saw a 16-year-old with an IQ of 150 come up to a book table at an autism meeting, and the parents were going to put him on disability because he wasn't very social. And I go, wait a minute, they used to call those gifted. And I'm getting very, very concerned about some of these quirky, smart kids going down a rut they shouldn't be going down. Each one of you guys in here is in a position where you could mentor one of these kids into your profession. And that kid's going to have a great life and be able to have a social interaction talking about computer stuff. See, the thing about being on the autism spectrum, I don't like to chit-chat for the sake of chit-chatting. That's just boring. When I was teased in high school and I was tortured, the refuges away from teasing were Mr. Carlock's science lab, horseback riding, and model rocket club.
So I think we're going to have to end there. Thank you very much, Dr. Grandin.